right, everyone. Welcome to this coaching salon talking about the gifts of disillusionment, which is like WTF, Bridget, the gifts of disillusionment, I think is an appropriate first response to that. This was a really interesting thing that happened. Before I get into that, let me just be organized. All right, so we're going to meet for an hour and a half. And with this, I'm always like with a smaller group, if we don't go an hour and a half, that's fine too. But we usually do end up going an hour and a half. Here's what we're going to go through today. But I don't this is not going to be quite as highly structured as the outline would suggest because I would like to have conversation and hear other people's perspectives and thoughts and stories as well as we go through this. So I'm going to start by telling my stories about disillusionment and where that's taken me, and even up to this week, and putting this salon out there and what else I learned about my own disillusionment, because it kind of went in a different direction than I expected. And then I want to have a little conversation around, like, what do we think the purpose of disillusionment is? And what do we think the gifts are of it? And then the main thing that I want to do, because I'm like, oh God, this can be such a heavy topic. And it did kind of, take me through the dark places a little bit. So what I want to make sure to do is, I think there is so much to be gained, harvested, acquired out of the ashes of disillusionment. And so I really want all of us to explore what that is for yourself and what you can take from it. And hopefully, because the big thing that inspired me to talk about this topic was, holy crap, let's see, almost all, actually not all in the US, but I'm sure you're all aware, because this was like a worldwide phenomenon, but this whole whipsaw that we had last month in the presidential election with changing candidates. And you know I mean, what a worldwide emotional, what just happened was that. And what was really interesting to me, I mean, there was so much, I'm completely fascinated by the whole thing, but for the purposes of this conversation, what interested me about that was, the resistance, right? And myself included, of like, oh, I don't want to make this change, or, maybe other people wanting to make the change, but just that holding on piece. And then when the surrender happened, and the change was made, and what really blew me away was this energy of hope, and just the sheer amount of, like, locked up energy that was released into the world really blew my mind and continues to blow my mind. And I'm kind of watching, I feel like this is a time of very dramatic change, in the same way I always feel like what's happening on the macro level is happening on the micro level as well. And so that really got me thinking about what happens when we do surrender, when we do make those hard choices, when we do finally hit bottom with something, or we are completely disillusioned and open to options that we had previously could not consider, and the amount of energy that can release almost immediately. So that's what got me thinking about this, because that's my ultimate intention here, is that we can release some new energy, some new positive energy. And I've seen this is how I do business. I mean, it's really how I do the mosaic work with people, is like, where is the energy feeling stuck and trapped? And how can we open that? How can we loosen that? And I do it in my business consulting. That's actually how I help businesses figure out what the problem is. As we look first at, I have fancy consulting language for it, obviously, but it's really just about, where is the energy stuck in this company, and how can we release it? Because we only have a finite amount of life force energy. We don't have, I don't experience myself or anybody else as having infinite amounts of energy. And so it's got to come from somewhere. And disillusionment is a huge energy suck when you're in it. And I think it's also commensurately huge place of energy release. So that's why we're having this conversation here today. And as I started to say, it was a really interesting process for me because what started this is I was talking to another coach friend, and I was getting ready to do another launch of my Mosaic Way learning community. And she was like, "Oh, you should do a coaching salon on disillusionment and kind of talk about your experiences in the personal development world and what happened and what it's like now." And I thought, "Oh, that's a great idea. And so I set it all up, got it all out there. And then once it was out there, I immediately wanted to cancel it. And I was like, because it took me down a little bit emotionally. And so as I started to just sit with that a little bit more and not react, because that's the first one of the first things I've learned is to try to not be too reactive to what I'm feeling in a moment and instead sit with it. And the reason why I sit with it is because there's information to be had there, right? So a couple things came up for me. One is that so the first thing that came up for me is what used to happen when I tried to talk about this time in my life is I was too afraid. I couldn't do it. And for good reasons, and I'll get into that a little bit, but what was clear to me is I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to say, look, I worked at Martha Beck's company. It was not a great experience. And I'll get into some of the reasons why that is. But everybody gets to say they either had a negative experience as a customer or as an employee or as a member of an institution or a church or whatever it is. Like you get to say that that wasn't a good experience for you and why that was. So I want to model that. So I felt like, okay, that's fine. But one of the places that still didn't feel good is I, for sure, in myself, never want to be trading on my own pain. So I wanted to be really clear in myself that this isn't about trotting out what is now an 8-year-old story about how somebody did me wrong or whatever, so that I can get more people or to sign up for something. So that was something I wanted to be really clear in myself about. And I actually think this is part of the gifts of disillusionment is discernment, right? Because there were times that I did trade on my own pain because I didn't know better. I traded on somebody else's pain because I didn't know better. And so that's something that's important to me for my own integrity that I've learned through my process of disillusionment is that I don't want to be doing that. So I got that all kind of cleared up. And then what I started to notice in my, as my partner calls it, in my soul ether, was that there was a different disillusionment that was coming online for me. So I'll tell you about, get to that past stuff. But what was happening today is I've been having this thread for a couple years now of being deeply tired of marketing my business in the way that I've been doing it. And yet I was going to say something else there, but the train of thought departed the station without me. But then I noticed, so here's my pattern in the face of disillusionment that I can see at all these different times in my life is, so I've been feeling deeply tired. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Deeply tired of marketing my business, want to be really clear, love my work more than ever, love everything I'm doing, love the people I work with, love it, love it, love it. So there's been this real, and I used to love marketing just as much, being on social media, doing the this and that and the other thing. And it just felt like real fun and easy. And even when it wasn't easy, it was fun. I have not been feeling that. And so my pattern is to try it this way and that way and this way and that way and perfect this technique. And if I just say the words in the exact right way, maybe just maybe then I will enjoy it and or get the results that I want from it because it's also just been, I think it's just a lot more difficult now to get attention out there in the marketplace. And there's people that do it. So I'm looking at the people that do it and I'm thinking, well, if they're doing it, why can't I do it? If I just try it that way, I should be able to do it. And so as I was sitting with this, I just realized like, oh, I am disillusioned about the way that I'm marketing. And so but what I had been doing in cycling through for a couple years now is I would always just do one more launch. Like, okay, I'll do this launch and then I'll do something else, but it was always leading me to the next launch. At the same time, I'm telling myself, I feel like I'm on a hamster wheel and it's driving me nuts. And I can't get off this hamster wheel. And so what came to me just yesterday was that, you know, yeah, I'm on the hamster wheel of launching all the time and I'm waiting. And then I keep doing it again, getting on that same hamster wheel because I won't let myself consider the idea that I want to just stop launching in that way. I don't want to do it anymore. Doesn't care. I don't care if I write the perfect emails. Like I have all the emails written for this launch. I was going to tell y'all about the Mosaic Way Learning Community as part of this launch, and I'll still tell you a little bit about it. But I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it until I know what to do, until I know to do. And so that was like just totally out of the blue that clearly disillusionment was running deeper in my soul ether than I realized. And so, but then it just made sense to me because that's what I've always done is I've had to become, for me to change, I've had to become disillusioned with something if to make a more fundamental change in my life. And so I think that's part of the role of disillusionment is it says hard stop, not here, not this, no going back. You cannot do this anymore. The end. And that's what it takes for me. I love to just hang on to something and try to make it work. And that's a gift in so many places in my life. And sometimes, what a gift overemphasized is a weakness. And so I see in my marketing career, like when I left corporate, I did that. Like, let me try it this way, let me try it that way. These people, that people, this role, that role. And finally I came to the end. And and the thing about disillusionment is it's also the end of your paradigm. It's the end of your world as you know it. And so it's like imagine you're an explorer back in the day and you believe you're pretty sure the world is flat. You're not totally sure, but you're pretty sure. But you take off in that boat anyway, fully believing that one option is falling off the end of the world because you don't know what's next past that. And it feels like a brick wall. And what you have to do is go past the wall to see what is there. And I think that's so this is the wall is our illusionment, and the wall coming down is our disillusionment. So, the biggest disillusionment for me was being part of the personal development industry, working for Martha's company. And I remember, being with Sue at the very beginning, and thinking, well, this person who's doing our training is a little quirky and there's some odd things going on. And she's berating one of our classmates for a couple hours for making an innocuous statement. Like, that's weird. And so it's interesting how for me, right out of the gate, the signs were there, the red flags were there. Think about, I think this a dating, this happens a lot, right? Like you really, because I really, there was so much that I loved and that I was attracted to these people that just were talking about things and kind of had an openness that I didn't really have a lot of experience with. And this idea that I could help people in this way, I didn't even know coaching was a thing. And I was like, I think I could really do this. And it was incredibly challenging, but in the best way. And then I saw all these, I met more people in the community, and there was all these shiny people, and I just really resonated. And so it was easy to downplay those red flags that I saw. And even learning from different spiritual teachers, like Byron Katie, and I thought, oh my gosh, mind blown. Like every thought you think isn't true. That is wild to to consider. Like I really hadn't considered that just because I'm thinking it doesn't mean it's true, and that there's a way to explore what you're thinking. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. And then as I went further along and started to learn more and became part of Martha's company and saw that this pattern of berating people that triggered her, disagreed with her, she was tired or she was anxious or whatever, and instead of owning, I think what really made me was really difficult for me about that was, why don't you just own it? Why don't you just own that somebody has triggered you, or you're upset, or you're, oh, that took me aback. And so this isn't like, I just want to be clear, Martha Beck or Byron Katie or any one of those people there, I want to talk about them as a mirror from my experience, you know? And so I just always thought it was so strange. Like you just can't admit fault, or you can't say that you were wrong, or that this person triggered you or whatever. But I would just kind of blow it off, or hyperbolic language and sort of a looser relationship with the truth. Those things, I I just had a lot of questions. And but I kind of pushed them aside because at this point I was also really invested. My I was making a lot of money. My entire community was associated with these people, and so much that I valued in life, and my own status, because the other piece was, I remember being at the first kind of group event that I went to with all the coaches, like a get together, and I remember seeing these really shiny ones in the middle, or shiny seeming, and that really seemed to have their shit together and were making lots of money and very popular and very self-confident. And for me, it was like a high school thing where I just thought, like, I want to be in that crowd, I want to be a cool kid. And then I proceeded to go, you know, put myself in there. And because that's what I thought success looked like. That's what I thought it meant to be, yeah, successful at the pinnacle, evolved, whatever you want to call it. But it was really from my own insecurity, and a less mature vision of what success looked like. I had never sort of questioned that for myself. So, I got there, and then as the CEO of the company, I ended up being sort of the apologist and the cleaner upper of things, and trying to smooth it over, and trying to, and what a shitty position to be in, because I've got to, like, keep it cool with my boss, and but also really empathizing with these people that have been treated poorly. And that was just my job. And I did it because I thought, like, that was my value, was just being a person that can go around and clean stuff up and talk about what somebody really meant to say or where they were really coming from when that wasn't the truth. And so for me, it took 6 years, but things really came to a head and got bizarre. Like finally I just couldn't, there were things happening in the organization and privately that I just could no longer abide. And I remember I went and sought the advice somebody else in an adjacent community that had experience with all of us, that I saw at the time was a wise person. That was kind of another disillusionment situation, but side story. Anyway, I was talking to this man and he just started kind of pointing out all the data points and putting I hadn't allowed myself to put like the true reality together of what was going on and how outside of my own value system it was. And I remember when he kind of laid the truth on me and I was ready to hear it. And it was like a disillusionment all at once. And I could, in my imagination, there was like this plexiglass up on my timeline as I looked back in time. And then all that plexiglass of perception fell. And I saw the truth, and I saw the truth now that I was party to something that was against my values, that I'm cleaning up messes that I should not be cleaning up. And I couldn't, and that was the break where I just couldn't be a part of it anymore. And I needed to leave, even though that was going to be painful in other ways. But the pain of continuing outweighed the pain of making the change, which is, and that's what, so I think that disillusionment and seeing the truth was the catalyst that forced me to leave this community that I loved, the money that was great, all the stuff and the attainment, I could say I had this title that I could say, it was a complete identity change. And, after I left, there was a lot of retaliation and a lot that was really scary and traumatic, and I wasn't able to, it took a few years before I was really able to show up and be a coach again and just sort of put my own work out there. But it was also, I had to work through my disillusionment about the coaching industry, so going back to teachers and these people that I admired, and like Byron Katie, it's wonderful to question your thoughts at a certain level, but but there's this practice in personal development and spirituality where some people try to make their models or their worldviews fit everything, and there's no nuance. And so I really struggled with, like, the work is not good for people with trauma, but I've seen Katie do that and harm people. There was also this idea floating around about, you're just, everybody's a player in your own movie. And 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 then there was kind of this idea, if you're suffering in the world, then in some way you've brought that on yourself. And I'm like looking at the suffering of the world going, how can that be true? And how can you just sort of ignore that? Or like a lot of the law of attraction stuff, just, focus on things that have a higher vibration. And I was like, that doesn't feel right. And even just stuff in the coaching industry, like we used to say, like, oh, if you can't get transformation in the first 20 minutes, you're not doing your job, just little things like that. And I thought, well, gosh, my clients, a lot of times for the first 20 minutes, they just want to share like what's happening in their life and kind of do a download. And I love that part, like that, and then we jump off from there. And there was a lot that was kind of harsh about coaching, you get in there, you get the thought, you make the transformation. And it was all about this kind of performance that I didn't feel like was about the people. But I guess, and then and then I found out like another thing that made me really angry was people pretending to be something they're not, people pretending to be enlightened when they're not. Byron Katie pretending that she doesn't have preferences and then curating very carefully every photo she puts out into the marketplace and talking about how, oh, she can't be bothered with the business, and she's central to her business, and she's just one. Marianne Williamson making people cry. Like, I don't want to burst people's bubbles. Like, look, I'm not here to do that, because I mean, almost a lot of times people will go, oh, I really like so and so, and I'll be like, hmm, because I saw a lot, and that's not what this is about. Like, what I want to say about all of that, and what I took from it is, you know, respect, rever, integrate the teachings, and don't put the teachers on the pedestals. And for me, what this process did was, the process of disillusionment is, it really crystallized like what I believe in, what's important to me, and my discernment came online. Like, I stopped just putting people that I thought were smarter than me or more evolved than me or whatever on a pedestal, and then buying whatever they were telling me, and ignoring my own voice and what my own soul had to say about this situation and what matters to me. And what matters to me is, like, I want the kind of spirituality that is embodied and grounded in here. We're not trying to transcend. And I get, like, transcendence is something that some people are interested in, and that is okay. I'm interested in coming into here. I'm interested in owning my mistakes and making it right with people. I'm interested in integrity in the true sense, of trying to be as true inwardly and outwardly as I can be, and the people that I respect are doing the same thing. And I don't expect perfection, and I don't want perfection, and I really relate and connect with people that are just trying to navigate this imperfect plane in their own imperfect ways, and are willing to own whatever is theirs to own. Like, those are the things that matter to me. Honesty, authenticity, those are my values. And I got really clear on that through that process of becoming disillusioned. So I think, as I see it now, disillusionment is part of the process of growing, of evolving, of becoming more yourself. And I also think disillusionment happens when life is trying to move you into a new direction. So in my mosaic work, I talk a lot about limitations, which I feel are related to this. And that was inspired by Parker Palmer, who I think is a great exemplar of like what I believe in. And he talks about limitations as when you tried to be the thing and do the thing and you just couldn't do it. And I think when you're trying to do that, I think the trigger is the disillusionment. Like, he tried to be a frontline social justice warrior. And that's what he really, because he feels really passionate about that. And that's what he wanted to do. But his soul was too sensitive for that work. And he kept beating himself up for that, and trying to be tougher, and trying to not burn out, and trying to do all the things. And then that catalyst, that disillusionment, I think in his case, maybe with himself, but also then realizing, I can't be this person. This is not the way that I can express how I care about this world and the people in it. I have to find a different way to express myself. And so then he became, the Parker Palmer that we know now, the teacher, the supporter of those in the front lines. And I think That's what disillusionment does, is it shows us who we really are and what really matters to us. So that's what we're going to talk about. Does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts before we move on? Did I forget anything major? Like,
No, I just was going to say thank you for sharing your story, because the video that you posted last week was actually the thing, because I'd gotten the email that this was happening and I was like, oh, I'm going to Seattle, I got to pack, whatever. And then that video, you just were so vulnerable and honest about this topic that I was like, ooh, I got to log into this. So everything you just said, thank you for sharing. And so many of my own story, I like all of it resonates with like, oh, yep, I got that experience. Yep, had that thing too. Oh, that's what that was. Yeah. So thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. Kirsten.
Yes, I can say exactly the same, to be honest, because you shared some things where I thought, oh, I mean, I started my coach training with Martha Beck, I think 12 years ago. And I had the same red flags. And it's so interesting to hear, you talking about some things that I thought, oh yeah, that's what I felt back then, but I didn't really recognize what it was, but I felt it. And to be honest, I always struggled with Byron Katie. And I did a lot of sessions with a coach and did the work. And every time I did it, I would get a migraine afterwards. So interesting signs, even on a physical level. So yeah, I think I learned a lot, but in the end it's exactly what it is. You have to find your own way. And I just had to think about it because we had a session the other day, Bridget, and we talked about the company that I just left yesterday. And same thing. So disillusionment. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And right. And it, I do think disillusionment forces you to consider new options that you have been resisting. And then how you know there's something there is if you, as you consider that new option, you feel more energy, even if you don't know why or what yet, but you're like, oh, that creates a little space. Huh. That's the track that you want to follow. Sue, thank you, Kirsten. Sue.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, you had me at disillusionment. I mean, just the word. And I didn't see whatever video you posted, but of course now I'm going to go look at it. But I saw that word and I was like, "Oh my God, that describes everything that's happening to me now." And as you talk, like how many times have I been disillusioned and yet persisted in a painful fashion? And that I'm having trouble getting past the most recent instance of that because it just kind of colors everything. So I think this is brilliant. And yes, thank you for sharing your story. I think that must have been incredibly difficult with the personalities involved. And I can't even imagine, having been on the receiving end of Martha's delightful treatment when I was sick as a dog in Africa. It was, like just, oh, everything you're saying completely resonates with one exception. I never saw you as an apologist. I saw you as the person who made the crazy shit make sense. Like you were the person in Austin, you were in incredible form. Like, there were stuff would happen, things were said, and then you would sort of explain it in a way like, oh, okay, for the mortals here on Earth, now it totally makes sense. So I never saw you as an apologist. I just saw you as the grounded person who could speak to the other grounded people.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sue. I really appreciate it. I see you, Jill. I'll get you. And yeah, it's like, so I would say that's my gift, right? Is I am able to take something that feels esoteric or floaty and or soulful or deep or even ineffable, like that kind of stuff, and bring it down into like, okay, how are we going to operationalize that, or like what's the practical aspect of that? So it's that process of separating out, like, what's my gift? What am I really good at, and where am I using that? Am I using it for the ultimate power of good, or am I using it in a way that works for me? And part of that was I really loved and enjoyed, and I thought made Martha and I like a really good combination in when it was in a healthy place. And then there's places where it's like I'm getting into trying to justify or smooth over the unjustifiable and the unsmooth overable. And like for me, that was the place of like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be doing one thing out in public and then, or just going, oh yeah, I'm just here for the paycheck or whatever. Like, so I appreciate it, but and it's also like that clarity. Like I use that, actually talk a lot about that, my ability to do that in my work now. And I think it's really central. So that was another thing that was really interesting, is when I left this community that I thought um, was all kind of around this person. And when I left, I realized like, oh no, there were parts of it that I was doing and that I was contributing to, and that made it good. And so that contrast really showed me like, oh, I love building community. I love people. I, you know, like authenticity. I like, there's all kinds of stuff that I got from that when I saw that some of those things came with me that I didn't expect to come with me. And it's like, oh, I must be doing that. So I think that's another thing, is when you pull away from something, the things that come with you are you. And that becomes really clear. And sometimes we don't see our light so clearly when we're in especially a kind of a dysfunctional structure. Um, yeah, thank you. Jill.
Well, I'm echoing the others' remarks in terms of the strength, the absolute strength and courage on your part to share this. It's, I don't know a human who can't relate on some level to what you're sharing, and that desire to belong, that
Yes.
sheer desire to belong is so powerful within each of us. And that price to pay when things begin to shift and we begin to question and wonder how or why we are in this quote unquote tribe, when we begin to have those nudges about, wait a minute, that's not necessarily how I feel about it, or it's not consistent or congruent with my values. And so you were just answering some of the questions I had about the lessons you've learned. So it seems to me that the pain that comes into place is the invitation to evolve. So it's like, okay, we can have the pain of staying, or we can have the pain of departing. But the beauty in the pain of departing is we get to have the opportunity to identify the lessons we've learned, because now we have that time to compare and contrast. A question I have for you, Bridget, is your grieving process. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, because there was profound grief. I would say I left and my life really fell apart. So there was so much grief because I felt like there was grief because some people I trusted or I thought we were friends were not friends. There was a lot of shenanigans that happened that felt like really retaliatory shenanigans that felt very scary. And so, and when there's a power differential, it's like, is this person going to come after me? And if they're using their power and clout to, mess with you, messing with my relationships and my work situations, like there was a lot. And then yeah, there was just grief because there was so much that was good. So I think it is really important to grieve. And even I remember, and then I was just, that's what, thank you for bringing this up, because that's what happened during this whole time between I announced the salon and yesterday, is I was also like, I am really grieving. I am grieving because something is changing right now today in the way that I'm doing business. And it may not end up looking like a big deal to anybody else, but it's a big deal to me. Something is changing. Something is coming. And now I know enough to know to just let myself grieve. Of course, my mind was going crazy with like, what's next? And trying to figure out. But now I know enough to know there's a place to stop and just say, okay, I am grieving. And actually going to my partner and saying like, God, I'm just really sad right now. And being able to talk about it, because that's new. That's something I got from that whole upheaval, was how to be in deeper relationship with my partner. And but yeah, I mean, that one was really a life shattering thing. There was a lot of grief. And then my strength began to rise. And because one of the things that was happening is people that I had been friends with were emailing me or calling me and saying like, Martha or somebody in the organization told me you said this. And the first time that happened, I was upset for a lot of reasons. This was something I had shared confidentially that was being shared with this person. And I was sort of caught, like I was talking trash about this person, and what she repeated to me was true. I said that. And so feel, obviously, I didn't feel great about that. And I felt a lot of shame about it. And so I kind of got through that one. And then there were a few other, somebody from the organization kind of wagging their finger at me about what she believes I was doing, which was not true. So by the time I got to the third or fourth person that was coming to me with this trash, I I was like, basically I was like, fuck you. You know what? You can fuck right off. And I was done with it. And so there was grief and there was shame and there was like all of that. And then strength started to rise, and like, you can drag me in the town square. You can, I will own, look, if I said or did something that I shouldn't be doing, I will own it and I will sincerely apologize. But don't come to me with your bullshit. Like, I'm not here for it. And so that to me was one of the gifts, is like one of the things about being dragged in that kind of a way is makes you a lot less sensitive to being dragged. And not that, but things like minor things that used to bother me more don't bother me as much anymore. I'm actually a lot better even. And then the deeper thing that happened is I'm a lot better about conflict. I'm a lot better about the fluidity of relationships, that they change. Sometimes you feel closer to people, sometimes you feel not as close. And sometimes people go away and sometimes people come in. And I'm just a lot more comfortable with the dynamic nature of relationships. So I think, I think of Carla McLaren's work in the language of emotions, and and the purpose of grief is letting go. And so now, once I get done thinking, and doing all the things and trying to figure out, like, I don't know if our patterns fundamentally ever change. I think to some degree we will always do what we do because it's how we deal with life. It's just, can we become more conscious? catch ourselves? Can we watch ourselves? Can we stop sooner? Can we go through the process more consciously? And so when the grief comes online, like it finally did this week, and I'm like, I just need to, I need to honor that. And then the kernels of something new are already coming. The energy of some new ideas are already coming. And that's what happened then too. I mean, that was, a multi-year process. And that's the thing too, is like sometimes these things really cast a long shadow over your life, or you're in an extended dark night of the soul. And I think the other thing that I took from this experience is like this sort of stubborn resiliency to just keep going, to just, sometimes you just have to keep going, and learning that you can take a punch. If life throws a punch your way, you can take that. You can be okay in the face of that. And the other thing, just to say for anybody that's in the dark night of the soul, and the thing I think about all the time is I love to read tarot cards and astrology and all that good stuff. And I think of the Wheel of Fortune card, which is not the Pat Sajak card. The idea is that the wheel always turns. And I really hang on to that. And that is part of my worldview and my belief that the wheel always turns, and I don't think about that as much when I'm on the upside. I'm like, I'm not going to think so much about the wheel turning right now. But when I'm on that downside, I think about that a lot. So, but yeah, the grief is real. And and it's a necessary part of the process, because you have passed the end of the world as you know it. And that's sad. Like, you're going to be sad about that. Jill.
Yeah, it's so what's coming to me right now is that you are role modeling in an immeasurable way how critical it is to the healing process to tell one story. And so I'm very, very grateful to you for that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm so glad, and that sometimes it will take you a long time to be able to tell your story, and that you tell your story in different ways. So, I didn't talk about this publicly for a long time. And I needed that space, and I needed, even though there were people that wanted to know, and everybody wants the tea, and God bless, I love some tea too. Like, I'm not judging, but I could not provide the tea because that just hurt too much. But what I did do was tell the story to people that I trusted, and I told the full story, which is like, there's a lot. And I needed those compassionate witnesses to just hear and validate, that was true, that really happened. And so the story changes over time until I get to now. And it's like, look, I have no compunction about talking about my experience with a previous employer being part of a community, and if people don't want me talking about that, then they shouldn't act like that. But that takes a long time. It can take a long time to get there, and you may never get there. You may only get there in your own heart and in your own mind.